Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the really fascinating world of contract law to figure out what actually happens when the very foundation of an agreement cracks. I mean, in a perfect world, everybody signs a contract and just does what they promise, right? But what if the bedrock of that entire contract was completely flawed from the get-go? Just think about it for a second. You sign on the dotted line, sure. But if you were forced or tricked, or maybe just totally mistaken about what you were agreeing to, is it really an agreement at all? The law actually says no. An otherwise totally valid contract might be completely unenforceable if the parties didn't genuinely agree to its terms. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with number 1, the illusion of agreement. Then we'll hit the defects. Number 2, mistakes. Number 3, fraudulent misrepresentation. Number 4, undue influence. And number 5, duress. All right, let's jump into section 1, the illusion of agreement. The absolute bedrock of any valid contract is this idea of voluntary consent. It's exactly what it sounds like, a knowing and voluntary agreement to the terms. For any contract to hold up in court, the consent from both sides has to be 100% voluntary. You need a true, authentic meeting of the minds. If that knowing and voluntary piece is missing, well, legally speaking, the contract doesn't have a leg to stand on. So the really crucial takeaway here is that if you can actually prove your consent was defective, you have a massive defense. You aren't just stuck forever simply because your signature is on a piece of paper. Without voluntary consent, an otherwise perfectly valid contract becomes what we call voidable or unenforceable. You can literally escape the obligations. Moving on to section 2, defect 1, mistakes. Now, to be super clear here, a mistake of fact is not about you just regretting a bad deal or making a lousy business decision. We're talking about a fundamental error regarding a material fact, something central to the agreement itself. It's the kind of error that completely shatters the authenticity of your consent. Here is where the law gets really interesting, because it distinguishes between who exactly messed up. If only one of you is mistaken, that's a unilateral mistake. Well, generally, you're stuck. The contract is still enforceable. But if it's a bilateral or mutual mistake, where both of you are completely confused about the exact same material fact, the court says, hold on a minute, and usually lets either party just walk away. Let's look at a pretty wild but concrete example. Imagine Carson signs a contract to buy a standard forklift from Yashi. But because of some massive clerical error, the paperwork they both sign actually refers to a giant, multi-ton construction crane. They both fully thought they were buying and selling a forklift, but the paper says something entirely different. That is your classic mutual mistake of fact. So what's the fix? Well, a court can grant an equitable remedy called reformation, where a judge literally rewrites the contract to match what everyone actually intended, basically crossing out crane and writing in forklift. Or they can grant rescission, which just cancels the whole contract and puts everyone back where they started before the mess happened. All right, section 3, defect 2, fraudulent misrepresentation. This one is definitely more malicious. Fraudulent misrepresentation is a consciously false assertion intended to mislead another party. Basically, someone outright lied to you to get you to sign on the dotted line. And because you were fed those lies, you never genuinely consented to the true terms. Your consent was just a complete mirage. To actually prove this in court, you have to hit a few specific elements. You need a consciously false misrepresentation and an innocent party who is fraudulently induced by it. But the biggest one is this concept called scienter. It's a Latin term for knowledge. It means the person lying to you absolutely knew the facts were false and had a direct conscious intent to deceive you. Oh, and if you want money back, damages, you also have to prove you suffered an injury. When it comes to fraud, the court actually gives the innocent party a choice. You can say, you know what, I want out, and ask for rescission and restitution, meaning everyone gives back whatever money or goods were exchanged and you walk away clean. You don't even have to prove an injury for that. Or, if you want, you can enforce the contract anyway and just sue them for damages for the harm their lie caused you. Let's move to section 4, defect 3, undue influence. This defect looks at situations where the issue isn't a flat-out lie, but rather a really unfair imbalance of power. Undue influence happens in relationships where one party can greatly influence the other, completely overcoming their free will. The person being taken advantage of isn't really making their own choices anymore. Their consent is totally overshadowed by the dominant person. This is a brilliant example of how the law actively steps in to protect vulnerable people. In fact, courts will often just presume undue influence is happening if a contract heavily enriches the dominant party in a fiduciary relationship. Think about a guardian pressuring their elderly ward into a terrible, lopsided deal, or a physician doing the same to a patient. The court immediately sees red flags there. Because the vulnerable person's free will was essentially hijacked, the remedy is incredibly straightforward. The contract becomes voidable. This gives the innocent, influenced party the power of unilateral rescission. Basically, they alone have the right to hit the cancel button and escape those oppressive terms. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Defect 4, Duress. This is without a doubt the most aggressive defect of consent. Duress is the use of wrongful or illegal threats, things like blackmail, extortion, or physical harm, to force a party into a contract. If you're forced to sign something because someone is blackmailing you, the law immediately recognizes that your consent was 100% involuntary. You didn't agree to anything, you were completely coerced. But you do have to be a little careful with the exact legal definition here. The threatened act absolutely must be wrongful or illegal. Simply threatening to exercise a legal right is not duress. For example, telling someone, hey, if you don't sign this settlement, I'm going to sue you in court. That's totally legal. The threat has to be illegal and completely strip away your ability to exercise free will. When you can prove true duress, it acts as a total, bulletproof defense to the enforcement of that contract. The court is going to readily grant rescission to cancel the agreement entirely and protect the victim of the extortion. So pulling this all together, you can see a really clear pattern. Each of these 4 fractures in voluntary consent, mistake, fraud, undue influence, and duress, maps directly to an equitable court remedy. Whether a judge is reforming a mutual mistake, awarding restitution because of a fraudster's lies, or just completely tearing up a contract born from undue influence or duress, the legal system has a highly structured way to ensure fairness and make the innocent party whole again. Knowing what you know now about the really strict requirements for genuine consent, seeing how a simple mistake, a calculated fraud, a power imbalance, or outright duress can totally shatter an agreement, well, it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Think back to the contracts you've signed in the past. Were they truly completely voluntary? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and always remember to question the fine print.